Some men think they know the desert. Dalton Reeves thought he was one of them. He'd crossed 100 miles of sand and stone, alone, confident in his ability to read the sky and trust his instincts. When the wall of dust appeared on the horizon that afternoon, he told himself he could outride it. He was wrong. The storm swallowed him whole, turned day into night, stripped away every landmark he'd memorized. By the time the wind died, Dalton had no idea which direction he'd come from or where he was going. 3 days later, when his water ran out and his horse collapsed, he understood something fundamental about the desert. It doesn't care how confident you are. It takes what it wants. And sometimes what it takes it doesn't give back. When consciousness returned, Dalton's first thought was that he'd died, and hell was surprisingly specific about rope quality. His wrists burned where thick bindings cut into skin. His shoulders screamed from being pulled back at an unnatural angle. He tried to move and discovered his ankles were bound too, and he was sitting in sand that was still cool, which meant it was either early morning or late evening. He forced his eyes open. 8 women stood in a semicircle around him. Not townswomen, not settlers, warriors. Each one wore leather and fringe darkened by sun and use. Their hair long and unbound except for beaded bands across their foreheads. They carried weapons with the casual comfort of people who'd been born holding them, and they were staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not curiosity, not hunger, something colder. Assessment. Dalton's throat was too dry to speak. He tried anyway. The sound that came out was barely human. One of the women, younger than the others with a scar cutting through her left eyebrow, said something in a language he didn't understand. Another woman answered, her tone sharp. An argument started, quick and heated, hands moving in gestures that clearly involved him. Then, the group parted. The woman who walked through them didn't need to announce her authority. It radiated from her like heat from stone. She wore a full headdress, eagle feathers spreading behind her head in a crown of white and brown. Turquoise and silver adorned her arms and throat. Her face was striking in a way that had nothing to do with softness. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single glance. Lips pressed into a line that suggested she'd forgotten how to smile years ago. She stopped 3 feet in front of him and studied him, the way someone might study a horse at auction, checking for defects. Calculating value. Dalton tried to straighten despite the ropes, tried to meet her gaze with something resembling dignity. She noticed the effort. One corner of her mouth twitched, but it wasn't quite amusement. When she finally spoke, her English was precise, barely touched by accent. "You were dying. We brought you water. Kept you breathing. You're welcome." Dalton's voice cracked when he answered. Funny way of showing gratitude. "The ropes seem excessive." "The ropes are necessary." She tilted her head slightly, still watching him. "Men who wake in unfamiliar places do unpredictable things. We prefer predictability." "We?" Dalton glanced at the other women, then back at her. "Where are your men?" Something flickered across her expression. Too fast to name. "We don't have men. Not anymore." The words hung in the air, strange and impossible. Dalton's mind tried to work through the logistics of what she was saying, and came up empty. A tribe of only women. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. He was missing something fundamental. The woman took a step closer, close enough that Dalton could see the beadwork on her headdress was intricate, traditional, the kind of craftsmanship that took months, close enough to see that her eyes weren't just dark, they were exhausted. She looked like someone who'd stopped sleeping years ago. "My name is Kaya," she said, "and you're going to help us whether you want to or not." "Help you with what?" Kaya's expression didn't change, but something in the set of her shoulders suggested she was bracing herself for his reaction, for what came next. "You're going to give me an heir." The words didn't register at first. They were too absurd, too disconnected from reality. Dalton stared at her, waiting for the punchline, the clarification, anything that would make the sentence make sense. But Kaya just stood there watching him process it, her face carved from stone. Behind her, the other women had gone still, waiting, and Dalton realized with creeping horror that she wasn't joking. Dalton's laugh came out harsh and disbelieving. "You're insane." Kaya didn't flinch. "I'm practical. You can't just..." He pulled against the ropes, felt them bite deeper into his wrists. "You can't keep a man prisoner and expect him to. This is madness. This is survival." Kaya's voice remained level, almost bored, as if they were discussing weather patterns. "My tribe is dying. We have no men. No way to continue our bloodline. You appeared in our territory alone, with no one who will come looking for you. It's not madness. It's opportunity." The casual way she said it made Dalton's stomach turn. He looked past her at the other women, searching for any sign of hesitation, any hint that this was some kind of test or joke. But their faces showed nothing. They'd heard this speech before. They'd already decided. "There are towns," Dalton said, forcing his voice steady. "Trading posts. You could find willing men. You don't need to." "We do." Kaya cut him off. "We can't go to towns. We can't be seen. Our survival depends on remaining hidden from the world that destroyed us." She paused, and for just a moment, something raw flickered behind her eyes. "We take what the desert brings us. And it brought you." Dalton's mind raced through options, reason with her, convince her this was wrong, but the set of her jaw told him reasoning wouldn't work. These women had made their choice before he'd even woken up. He was already decided for them, a solution to a problem he didn't fully understand yet. "And if I refuse?" he asked. Kaya's expression didn't change. "Then we cut you loose in the desert. 3 days in the direction you were heading when you collapsed. No water, no horse, no weapons." She let that sink in. "You'll be dead before sunset tomorrow." It wasn't a threat. It was a fact, delivered with the same flat certainty as someone stating that fire burns or stone sinks. Dalton felt his chest tighten. She meant every word. This wasn't negotiation. It was presentation of terms. "That's not a choice," he said. "No," Kaya agreed. "It's not." The woman with the scarred eyebrow said something sharp in their language. Kaya answered without looking away from Dalton, her tone firm. The other woman pressed her point, gesturing at him, clearly arguing. Kaya's response was short and final. The scarred woman fell silent, but her expression promised this conversation wasn't over. Kaya turned back to Dalton. "Nady thinks we should just take what we need and leave you for the vultures after. She doesn't believe in unnecessary mercy." Kaya took another step closer, close enough that Dalton could smell sage and smoke on her clothes. "I convinced them to offer you a chance to cooperate, to be treated with dignity instead of as livestock. But my patience has limits." She crouched down, bringing her eyes level with his. This close, Dalton could see the fine lines around her eyes, the way her jaw muscles were clenched tight, the barely contained exhaustion that lived in her bones. She looked like someone who'd been at war so long she'd forgotten peace was possible. "You have until morning to decide," Kaya said quietly. "Cooperate and live as one of us. Refuse and die free in the sand." She reached out, and Dalton flinched involuntarily, but she only brushed dust from his shoulder. Her touch impersonal, clinical. "Choose wisely, Dalton Reeves. The desert doesn't offer second chances." She stood and walked away, her warriors following. Only 2 remained behind, standing guard. They didn't look at him, didn't speak, just watched the horizon while Dalton sat in the sand, his wrists burning, his mind spinning through impossible options. And somewhere in the camp behind him, he heard the sound of women's voices, low and rhythmic, singing something that sounded like prayer or prophecy or both. Night fell, and nobody came to untie Dalton. His shoulders had gone from burning to numb, which somehow felt worse. He could see the camp now, spread out in a natural depression between 2 rock formations that would make it invisible from any distance. 15, maybe 20 structures made of hide and wood, arranged in a loose circle around a central fire pit. Efficient, defensible. These women knew what they were doing. He counted them as they moved through camp. 18 total. The youngest looked barely 16, the oldest perhaps 50. All of them moved with purpose. No wasted motion. They weren't playing at being warriors. They were warriors, the kind forged by necessity rather than choice. Dalton watched them prepare the evening meal, tend to weapons, check supplies. Normal camp activities, except there was nothing normal about a camp with no men, no children, no sound of anything except women's voices in a language he couldn't understand. Where were the families? The next generation? If Kaya wanted an heir so desperately, where were the other children? The answer settled in his gut like spoiled meat. There were no other children because there were no men to father them. Whatever had happened to this tribe, it had been recent enough that children hadn't grown yet, or catastrophic enough that none had survived. The woman with the scarred eyebrow, Nady, approached with a canteen. She didn't ask permission before grabbing his jaw and forcing the water past his lips. Half of it spilled down his chin. She didn't seem to care. When the canteen was empty, She dropped it in the sand and walked away without a word. Charming, Dalton muttered. She lost her husband and both brothers. The voice came from his left. An older woman emerged from the shadows, moving with the careful precision of someone whose joints protested every step. Her hair was streaked with gray, her face lined with decades of sun and hardship. You remind her of what she lost. She would prefer you dead. Can't imagine why I'm not winning hearts, Dalton said. The woman lowered herself to the ground with a soft grunt, sitting just outside his reach. My name is Sahale. I am the one who argued against keeping you alive. Appreciate the honesty. Honesty is all we have left. Sahale studied him with eyes that missed nothing. You're wondering what happened to our men. Everyone asks eventually, even if they're too frightened to say it aloud. Dalton said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Raiders came 3 seasons ago, Sahale continued, her voice flat, stripped of emotion by repetition. They wanted our horses, our supplies, our land. Our men fought them off, but the raiders came back with more men, and more, and more. She paused. By the time it ended, every man we had was gone, killed defending us, and we were left with a choice. Scatter and die slowly, absorbed into settlements that would never accept us, or stay together and find another way to survive. So you decided to kidnap men from the desert. You're the first. Sahale's mouth twitched in something that might have been amusement. We've been searching for 3 years. Most men who cross this territory travel in groups or stay on established trails where we can't risk being seen. You're the first fool stupid enough to ride alone through the deep desert. The words stung because they were true. Dalton had been proud of his ability to navigate alone, to trust himself above all others. That pride had led him here, bound and trapped and facing a choice no man should have to make. Kaya could have her pick of willing men in any town, Dalton said. Why this? Why force it? Sahale looked at him for a long moment. Because if we go to towns, we cease to exist. We become their women, their servants, their property. We lose everything our mothers and grandmothers built. This way, we survive on our terms. She stood slowly. Kaya believes you're different. She thinks she sees something worth keeping. I think she's desperate and making dangerous decisions. Sahale started to walk away, then paused. Prove me wrong or prove me right. But decide quickly. Desperate women make poor captors. Eventually, they become something worse. She disappeared into the darkness, leaving Dalton alone with 2 silent guards and 1,000 burning questions. In the distance, Kaya stood near the central fire, her headdress removed, her long black hair catching firelight. She was looking directly at him across the camp, her expression unreadable, and Dalton realized that whether he agreed or refused, he was already part of something he didn't fully understand, something that wouldn't let him go easily. Morning came with Kaya standing over him, her shadow blocking the sun. She'd come alone. No guards. No witnesses. Just her and the knife she held loosely in one hand. Dalton's heart kicked against his ribs before he realized she was cutting the ropes at his ankles, not his throat. Stand up, she said. His legs screamed when he tried. 3 days of dehydration followed by a night bound in one position had turned his muscles to stone. He made it halfway before stumbling. Kaya caught his arm, her grip surprisingly strong, and steadied him without comment. When his legs finally remembered how to function, she cut the bindings at his wrists. Blood rushed back into his hands in a wave of needles. Dalton bit back a curse and flexed his fingers, watching circulation return in painful increments. Kaya watched him, waiting. You're letting me go? Dalton asked. I'm giving you a choice. Kaya gestured toward the eastern edge of camp. Walk that direction for half a day. You'll hit a trail that merchant wagons use. Someone will find you eventually, or you'll die trying. Either way, you'll be free. Dalton stared at her. This wasn't what he'd expected. And the other option? Stay. Not as a prisoner. Kaya's dark eyes held his. As a partner. Give us a chance to show you who we are before you decide we're monsters. Partners don't usually start with kidnapping. No, Kaya agreed. But desperate people start with whatever works. She crossed her arms, the knife still dangling from her fingers. You want to know why it has to be me who bears the air? Why I can't just pick any woman in camp and let this be someone else's burden? Dalton nodded slowly. Kaya was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. I'm the last of the chief's bloodline. My mother led this tribe. Her mother before her. Back 7 generations. Unbroken. Our people believe that leadership passes through blood, through the women who carry it. She paused. If I die without a child, the line ends. And without that line, we're not a tribe anymore. We're just survivors waiting to scatter. That's a heavy crown, Dalton said. It's the only one I have. Something raw crossed her face. I watched my mother die defending this camp. Watched my sister fall beside her. I was supposed to die too, but Sahali dragged me away, made me run while everyone I loved bought us time with their lives. Kaya's knuckles whitened around the knife handle. I don't get to give up. I don't get to choose an easier path. I carry this or I dishonor every person who died keeping me alive. For the first time since waking in this camp, Dalton saw past the warrior queen exterior. Saw the woman underneath who was barely older than him, carrying weight that would have crushed most people years ago. She wasn't cruel. She was drowning and grabbing whatever floated past. Why me? Dalton asked. Specifically, you said I was the first to come through alone, but why not wait for someone better? Someone stronger, smarter, more, because I don't have time. Kaya's voice cracked slightly. I'm running out of seasons. The tribe is running out of hope. And you, she stopped, seeming to reconsider her words. Sahale is right. I'm desperate, but I'm also a good judge of character. I've been watching you since you woke. The way you look at us, not with hatred, with confusion, yes, anger, certainly, but also curiosity. You're trying to understand instead of just condemn. She took a step closer, close enough that Dalton could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly before she forced them still. I need someone who can see past the situation to the people inside it, Kaya said quietly. I need someone who won't just submit out of fear, but might choose to stay because he sees value in what we're trying to preserve. She met his eyes. I think that might be you, but I could be wrong. And if I am, you should leave now, before I waste any more hope on an empty vessel. The words hung between them, honest and brutal and more vulnerable than Dalton had expected. This wasn't a captor making demands. This was a woman admitting she was gambling everything on a stranger and terrified she'd lose. Behind them, the camp was waking fully. Women emerged from their shelters, starting the day's work. Nadi stood near the fire pit, arms crossed, watching with obvious disapproval. Sahale sat outside her dwelling, her ancient eyes tracking every movement between Kaya and Dalton. One day, Dalton heard himself say, give me one day to see your tribe, to understand what you're protecting. Then I'll decide. Kaya's shoulders dropped slightly, relief bleeding through her rigid control. One day, that's all I ask. Kaya led Dalton through camp as the sun climbed higher. Women stopped their work to stare, some with open hostility, others with cautious curiosity. Nadi tracked their movement with barely concealed disgust. Dalton kept his hands visible, his posture non-threatening, acutely aware that one wrong move could turn this fragile truce into violence. The camp was larger than he'd realized. Beyond the main circle of dwellings, there were storage areas dug into the rock face, a corral holding 6 horses, and a weapons cache that made Dalton's throat tighten. These women weren't just surviving, they were prepared for war. We hunt, Kaya said, gesturing to where 3 women were skinning a deer. We trade with distant settlements using intermediaries who don't know where we camp. We've learned to need very little from the outside world. Sounds lonely, Dalton said. Survival often is. Kaya moved past the butchering site toward a cluster of younger women working leather. This is Ayasha, our healer. The woman who looked up had kind eyes and hands stained with plant dyes. She studied Dalton with professional interest, noting the rope burns on his wrists, the dehydration still evident in his face. He needs willow bark tea, Ayasha said in accented English, and better food than we've been giving him. He's not a prisoner anymore, Kaya replied. Ayasha's eyebrows rose. Bold choice. Desperate choice. Nadi's voice cut in. She'd followed them, her hand resting on the knife at her belt. He'll run the moment our backs are turned. Dalton met her hostile gaze. If I was going to run, I'd have done it when Kaya cut the ropes. Maybe you're just waiting for a better opportunity. Nadi stepped closer, deliberately invading his space. Maybe you're planning to slit throats in the night when we're sleeping. Nadi, Kaya's voice carried warning. Enough. You're betting our survival on a man we found dying in the sand. Nadi's scar pulled tight as her face twisted with anger. A man who knows nothing about us, cares nothing for us, who will use us and leave the moment it suits him, because that's what men do. The raw pain in her voice told Dalton everything about what she'd lost, what had been taken from her. He understood her hatred because it was earned, justified by experience. These women had every reason not to trust him. "You're right," Dalton said quietly. Nady blinked, caught off guard. "I don't know you. I don't understand what you've been through. And if our situations were reversed, I'd probably want me dead too." Nady's hand tightened on her knife. "But I'm not the men who killed your family," Dalton continued. "I'm just someone who got lost, and I'm trying to understand what this," he gestured at the camp, at all of them, "actually is before I make any decisions." Something shifted in Nady's expression. Not forgiveness, not even acceptance, but maybe the smallest crack in her hatred. She turned and walked away without another word. Kaya's hand brushed Dalton's shoulder, brief and almost hesitant. "That was well done!" Before Dalton could respond, a child's scream cut through the camp. Both of them spun toward the sound. Near the corral, a girl no older than 6 had climbed through the fence and was standing directly in front of a spooked horse. The animal's ears were pinned back, its eyes rolling white. One kick could kill her. Dalton moved without thinking. Years of working with horses overrode everything else. He vaulted the fence, placing himself between the child and the animal, his voice dropping into the low, calm tone that every good horseman learned. The horse snorted, stamping, but didn't bolt. Dalton kept talking, kept his movements slow and deliberate, until the animal's ears flicked forward and the tension left its muscles. Only then did he scoop up the terrified child and carry her back to safety. A woman rushed forward, tears streaming, taking the girl from Dalton's arms with desperate gratitude. She spoke rapidly in her language, clutching her daughter, looking between Dalton and Kaya with an expression somewhere between shock and relief. Kaya translated, "She's thanking you. That's her only child, the last one born before the raids." Dalton looked at the little girl, maybe 6 years old, clinging to her mother. The last child. He thought of what Sahali had said. 3 years since the men died. That meant this girl was likely the youngest person in the entire camp. No babies, no toddlers, no future unless something changed. The weight of what Kaya had been trying to tell him finally settled in his chest. This wasn't abstract. It wasn't philosophical. These women weren't trying to trap him out of cruelty. They were watching their entire world die, one generation at a time. Kaya stood beside him, so close their shoulders almost touched. "Now do you understand?" Dalton watched the mother carry her daughter away. Watched the other women return to their work with heavy expressions. "Yeah, I'm starting to." That evening, Kaya invited Dalton to eat with the Council of Elders. 5 women sat around a small fire outside Sahali's dwelling, their faces carved by years and loss. They didn't hide their scrutiny. Every movement Dalton made was catalogued, judged, weighed against whatever standards they'd developed for evaluating the man who might determine their tribe's future. Sahale passed him dried meat and something that looked like flatbread. "You saved Takota's daughter today." Anyone would have. Not anyone. The woman to Sahale's left spoke in heavily accented English. Many men would have let the child learn a hard lesson. "You risked the horse's hooves without hesitation." Dalton shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I've worked with horses most of my life. It wasn't bravery, just reflex. Reflex reveals character," Sahali said. "You can lie with words. Your body tells the truth." They ate in silence for a while. Dalton could feel questions building in the air, unspoken but pressing. Finally, Kaya broke the quiet. "Tell us about your life, before the desert." Dalton chewed slowly, considering. "Not much to tell. Worked ranches from Texas to Colorado. Never stayed anywhere long. Preferred moving to settling." "Why?" Kaya asked. The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. Dalton stared into the fire, trying to find words for something he'd never fully examined. "Guess I was running from something I couldn't name. Every place started feeling empty after a while, like I was waiting for something that never showed up. And now?" Kaya's voice was soft. "Does this place feel empty?" Dalton met her eyes across the fire. "No, it feels the opposite. Too full, too heavy, like there's more meaning here than I know what to do with." Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, maybe. 2 people who'd been running from different things, suddenly stopped in the same impossible place. One of the elders said something in their language. Sahal nodded and turned to Dalton. "She says you have sad eyes. The eyes of someone who's been alone too long." Probably accurate, Dalton admitted. Kaya stood abruptly. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. Dalton followed her away from the fire, past the edge of camp to where the desert stretched endless under stars so bright they looked painted. The night air was cold after the day's heat. Kaya wrapped her arms around herself, and for the first time she looked small, uncertain. I need you to understand something, she said, not looking at him. What I'm asking of you isn't just about an heir. It's about hope. These women have been watching their world die for 3 years. Every morning they wake up knowing we're one step closer to extinction. They need to believe that tomorrow can be different than today. That's a lot of pressure to put on a stranger. It is. Kaya finally turned to face him. But you're not feeling like a stranger anymore. Not to me. The admission caught Dalton off guard. Kaya's defenses had been impenetrable since the moment he'd woken bound in the sand. Now they were cracking, showing the woman underneath the crown and the burden. I watched everyone I loved die, Kaya continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I held my mother while she bled out from wounds she took defending me. I burned my sister's body because there was no one else left to do it. And every day since then I've had to be strong, had to be certain, had to convince everyone that I knew what I was doing. Her hands were shaking now, but I don't. I'm terrified every moment that I'm going to fail them, that my decisions will be the ones that finally break us. Without thinking, Dalton reached out and took her hand. She stiffened, then relaxed, her fingers curling around his. Her skin was calloused from work, warm despite the cold air. You're not going to fail them, Dalton said. Anyone who fights this hard doesn't know how to quit. Kaya's eyes glistened in the starlight. And you? Are you a man who quits? Or are you a man who stays? The question hung between them, enormous and impossible. Dalton knew that whatever he said next would change everything. For her, for the tribe, for himself. He thought about his life before, the endless moving, the emptiness that had driven him deeper and deeper into isolation until he'd nearly died from it. He thought about the little girl in the corral, about Sahal's tired wisdom, about Nadi's justified hatred, about women who refused to give up even when the world had taken everything, about Kaya, standing here in the dark, letting him see her fear because she thought he might be someone worth trusting with it. I don't know yet, Dalton said honestly, but I'm not running tonight. Kaya's grip tightened on his hand. Then stay tonight, and tomorrow night, and the night after. Stay until you know. 3 days passed. Dalton worked alongside the women, learning their rhythms, their language, the way they'd built a functioning society from the ashes of catastrophe. He mended fences, tended horses, helped hunt. The work felt good, purposeful in a way his aimless drifting never had. Nadi still watched him with suspicion, but she'd stopped reaching for her knife when he approached. Sahali nodded approval when he fixed a water storage system that had been leaking. Even the little girl, whose name he'd learned was Imala, smiled when she saw him now. And Kaya. She was everywhere and nowhere, simultaneously present and distant. Dalton caught her watching him sometimes, her expression unguarded for just a moment before the Queen's mask returned. They hadn't spoken privately since that night under the stars, but something had shifted between them, an awareness that hummed in the air when they were close. On the 4th morning, a rider approached camp, one of the scouts who'd been monitoring the trade routes. She spoke urgently with Kaya, gesturing eastward. Dalton caught enough words to understand. Merchant wagons, heading north, passing close enough to intercept. Kaya found him near the corral an hour later. Her face was carefully neutral. There's a caravan half a day's ride east. If you leave now, you can reach them before sunset. They'll take you to the nearest settlement. From there, you can go anywhere you want. She paused. This is your chance. No one will stop you. Dalton looked at her, trying to read past the mask. You want me to go? I want you to choose freely. Kaya's voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her, fingers twisting together. If you stay because you're afraid of the desert or because you think you have no other option, then I've failed. I'll have forced something that should only ever be given willingly. And if I go, then we keep surviving, keep searching, hope the desert brings us someone else before it's too late. Kaya finally met his eyes. I won't hate you for choosing yourself. That's not weakness. That's honest. Dalton had never heard anyone with power speak like that, with such raw, undefended honesty. Kaya could have manipulated him, played on guilt or obligation. Instead, she was handing him freedom and calling it the right thing to do. I need to think, Dalton said. Kaya nodded and walked away, her spine straight despite the weight pressing down on her shoulders. Dalton spent the afternoon at the edge of camp, staring at the horizon. East meant escape. East meant returning to the life he'd known. The constant movement, the emptiness that had driven him into the desert in the first place. He'd be free. But what was freedom worth if you had nowhere you wanted to go? He thought about the women in this camp, about how they'd lost everything and refused to surrender, about Sahali's wisdom, and Nadi's fierce protection, and Ayasha's gentle healing, about Amala, the last child, who deserved to grow up knowing she wasn't the end of her people's story, about Kaya, who carried impossible weight and never let it crush her. The sun was setting when Dalton walked to Kaya's dwelling. She sat outside, her headdress removed, her long hair unbound and falling past her shoulders. She looked younger without the ceremonial trappings, more vulnerable. She saw him approaching and stood, her body tense, bracing for rejection. Dalton stopped in front of her. "I'm not leaving." Kaya's breath caught. "You're certain?" "No," Dalton admitted. "I'm terrified. I don't know if I'm strong enough for what you need. Don't know if I'm good enough for what you deserve. But I know that running hasn't made me happy. And I know that for the first time in years, I've felt like I matter. Like what I do actually means something." Kaya's hand rose slowly, hesitantly, until her fingers touched his face. Her palm was warm against his jaw, her touch gentle in a way that contradicted everything about the warrior queen. This close, Dalton could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes, the way her lips parted slightly as she looked at him. "You matter," Kaya whispered. "Not because of what you can give us, because of who you are." The space between them disappeared. Dalton wasn't sure who moved first. But suddenly Kaya's arms were around his neck, and his hands found her waist, and they were holding each other like two people who'd been drowning and finally found solid ground. "I choose this," Dalton said against her hair. "I choose you. I choose them. Not because I have to, because I want to." Kaya pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. Tears tracked down her cheeks, but she was smiling. Actually smiling, open and unguarded and devastatingly beautiful. "Then welcome home, Dalton Reeves." The ceremony happened at dawn, when the desert air was still cool and the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. The entire tribe gathered in a circle, every woman present to witness what they'd fought so hard to make possible. Dalton stood beside Kaya, both of them dressed simply in clothes dyed with traditional patterns that Ayasha had prepared. Sahali performed the ritual, speaking words in the old language that Dalton was beginning to understand. Words about continuity and survival, about choosing family rather than inheriting it, about the courage required to start again after everything had been lost. She tied a woven cord around their joined hands, the fiber rough against Dalton's skin but solid, real, binding him to this moment and this choice. Kaya spoke her vows in English so Dalton would understand every word. "I accept you as partner, as equal, as the one who will stand with me in rebuilding what was broken. Not as property, not as prisoner, as family." Dalton's voice was steady when he responded. "I choose this life, these people, this future. Not because I was forced, because I was lost and you showed me where I belonged." When Sahali untied the cord, the tribe erupted in ululation, a sound of celebration that echoed off the rock formations surrounding their hidden valley. Women who'd watched Dalton with suspicion now approached with acceptance, touching his shoulder, offering words in their language that he recognized as welcome and blessing. Even Nadi came forward. She didn't smile, but the hatred had left her eyes. She said something brief in her language, then switched to English. "Prove worthy of her. That's all I ask. Every day," Dalton promised. "For as long as I live." Nadi nodded once and walked away, satisfied. The celebration continued through the morning. Food appeared from carefully hoarded supplies, and for once, the women allowed themselves joy instead of just grim survival. Dalton watched Imala play with the other children, her laughter carrying across camp, and felt something settle in his chest. Purpose, belonging, the thing he'd been searching for in all those empty miles of drifting. Later, when the sun climbed high and the camp returned to its daily rhythms, Kaya led Dalton to her dwelling. Inside, it was simple but carefully maintained. Blankets woven with intricate patterns, storage baskets containing personal items, a space that was hers alone, now shared. They sat together in the cool shade, shoulders touching, fingers intertwined. No rush, no pressure, Just two people who'd found each other in impossible circumstances and decided that impossible was worth fighting for. "What happens now?" Dalton asked. Kaya leaned her head against his shoulder. "Now we live, we build, we hope." She paused. "And when the time comes, when we're ready, we give this tribe the future they've been waiting for. A child. A beginning," Kaya corrected. "The first of many, if the spirits are kind. Not just from us. You being here, choosing us, it shows the other women that maybe there are men worth trusting. Maybe we can find others. Carefully. Slowly. But the possibility exists now where it didn't before." Dalton understood what she meant. He wasn't just Kaya's partner. He was proof that the tribe could survive contact with the outside world without losing themselves. A bridge between what they'd been and what they might become. Months would pass before Kaya told him she was carrying his child. Almost a year before that child, a daughter with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn jaw, took her first breath in this hidden valley. But that was future. That was hope made flesh. In this moment, Dalton Reeves sat with his wife, the woman who'd saved his life by capturing it, and felt something he'd never felt before. Complete. The desert had taken everything from him, stripped him down to nothing, forced him to choose what he truly wanted when all the distractions fell away. And what he'd chosen was this: family, purpose, a life that meant something beyond his own survival. He'd gotten lost in the desert and found a tribe that needed him. But the truth was simpler and more profound. They'd needed each other, and that was enough to build a future on. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and destiny collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.